it's okay to be vulnerable. I think it's easy to assume that everybody around you wants you to be perfect. Right. They want to look at you for answers. And it's okay to sometimes have questions. It's okay to say, I don't know. And to say, these are the things that I'm working on. We want to create time for healthcare. We want to solve workforce shortage. And if you do that, you will become very profitable. I think if you focus on profitability, you will often lose sight of your mission. If you have the right mission and you accomplish it, the profitability and the respect will follow.
I've seen a lot of companies falter in their scaling journey when the focus shifts from people to other things. Talk to me a little bit about how you're thinking about it.
I think what you just said is the most important thing. Your focus can't shift away from people.
Sure.
And I think it's important to know, especially in the age of AI, whether it's people or not having people that is the problem or something more fundamental. And so many companies implicitly or explicitly measure their success or their growth with the number of people. We rarely do that. We don't have explicit headcount growth goals. And I want to try and keep that for as long as possible. We need to be accomplishing our goals from a building well and selling well perspective, and then hire to fill the gaps that we have in our ability to execute.
Please buckle your seatbelts because the scale of flight is taking off now.
Only one startup in 25 reaches the $1 million mark in ARR. Only 1 in 250 gets to the 10 million mark. And only 1 in 100,000 ever gets past the 50 million mark. Are you losing your sleep over scaling your startup? It's time for you to join the Scale Up Flight, where we take you on a fascinating journey every fortnight with a founder, an investor, an operator, and ecosystem builder. It's time for you to buckle your seatbelts, as this isn't for the faint of heart. Hello, welcome to another episode of the Scale Up Flight. My name is Peeyush Upadhyay, and I have the pleasure of being joined today by the company lead and the co-founder of Infinitus Systems, Ankit Jain. Ankit, welcome aboard. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
So am I. And it's very interesting that you say that you don't use the CEO title. So tell me a little bit about that before we dive into it.
Well, a few years ago, one of my mentors, Gokul Rajaram, published a blog post about how titles are the wrong thing to focus on at startups. When you're building a company, when you're building a team, you should have one mission and one mission alone, which is to accomplish what you set out to do. In our case, we've set out at Infinitus to solve healthcare's workforce shortage using AI and technology. We're not getting together to get title inflation. We're not getting together to run rat races to go from engineer 1 to engineer 2 to engineer 3 to senior engineer. We've got 45 engineers today. And if we were to have a set of titles, we'd probably have 8 or 9 titles in any engineering ladder or any go-to-market ladder. And so from the early days, we're almost 6 years in, we've said we're going to focus on impact, on scope, and really working on our mission and not on things like titles.
That is pretty compelling. So let's talk about it a little bit more. So how does this value system and this belief cascade down to all the different functions in the organization? Like, I'm just curious to know, what titles would you have in the revenue organization, in the go-to-market organization, as an example?
I think it's a good question. It's something that we talk about with every prospective team member. We talk about with everybody inside the team, because you have to reiterate your values. And when we think about this, if you are an individual contributor, your title in our HR systems or on your offer letter will be member of X staff, where X is the role that you play.
Right.
And so if you're an engineer, you're a member of technical staff or member of engineering staff. If you're on the go-to-market sales team, member of sales team or something of that sort. If you lead a group of people, whether it's temporary or permanent, whatever you're leading, the effort or the team, that followed by the word lead. So if you're leading a sales team, you're sales lead.
Sure.
And then if you say leading the West Region sales team, West Region sales lead. The same thing is true on the engineering side.
Right.
In the early days, as the team started growing, we had a full stack engineering lead, a back end engineering lead, and an AI and machine learning engineering lead. Then we reorganized the team to be business goal oriented. So we have a team that focuses on new efforts that drive top line revenue. So there's a top line lead, but it allows us to be nimble, allows us to have multiple people in different pods, and depending on the role they're playing in that pod, that internal title can be different. But the title is not what gives you authority. It doesn't give you agency. It's the impact that you're having. It's the role that you're playing and the ownership that you take.
That is wonderful. And I think that ties in very well to the culture that you're trying to build at your company. People join you not for the title. So at least one part is taken care of, because this is something I've seen in a lot of organizations. People are at a VP level. They would take up a job at a SVP level because they see that, the impact of their role is going to be more. So I'm glad, and it's very, very refreshing that you say that you don't really care about titles too much. Wonderful. And we will dive into the cultural aspects a little bit more, and we'll get into the nuts and bolts, Ankit. But I do want to spend some time talking about the genesis and the inception of Infinitus. So I know that you're a serial entrepreneur. This is your third venture. Started off with Quetra, if I pronounce it right. And Quetra was then acquired by another firm in 3 years of its being. And then you moved on to founding Gradient Ventures, which was a Google-led firm. So you were a venture capitalist, right? And then to starting Infinitus. Tell me a little bit about how did the idea occur? Were you very, very sold on healthcare? And did you identify the problem at the outset saying, okay, this is what we're going to attack. This is what we were going to solve for. Was that very compelling? Talk to me a little bit about your thought process.
I think it's an interesting story that I'd like to share from about 15 years ago. So before any of these journeys, the first startup that I joined out of grad school was in the process of getting acqui-hired by Google. And some of us weren't sure whether that was a good financial outcome or not, because as many of your listeners probably know, an acqui-hire deal is not a huge windfall from a financial perspective. It's a glorified job offer with a few sweeteners added on top.
Sure.
And so as we were going through that, a few of us decided to go interview around and see what else was in the market. And I was lucky enough to meet 3 individuals, Dheeraj, Ajit, and Mohit. They had started a company called Nutanix. And they had one engineer named Brian at the time. And I interviewed with them, and they made an offer to me to join them as engineer number 2. And I got the offer letter, and I think it had something like 25,000 stock options. So like the smart 24-year-old, I said, well, how many options do you have in the option pool, and how many shares are there outstanding? Right. Asked all the questions that, back then Mark Sister's blog called Two Sides of the Table was saying you should always ask us before taking a job at a startup.
And you didn't have ChatGPT back in the day.
And we didn't have ChatGPT back in the day.
Yeah.
I remember Dheeraj and Mohit answered all of those questions. But then the one question I didn't believe was when they said, well, we're valued at $25 million. And I think they'd been in existence for something like 2 months.
Right.
And I'm like, you've barely started writing code. You have no revenues. Why would you be worth $25 million? Now, this is also coming from a little bit of scar tissue where the startup I had just been at was going through almost a fire sale acqui-hire after being valued at a few $100 million and having no revenue. So I was not sure how I should value these companies. And so I decided not to join Nutanix. But the one thing I remember Dheeraj telling me, the reason we're valued so much is there's 3 large enterprise customers who have said they will pay us at least $1 million each if we build this product. Okay, so I'm like, great. Anybody can tell. Yeah, and I was like, great. Anybody can tell me.
That's a smart business model.
It's a smart business model. So I kind of discounted it, and that's why I didn't join them. Now, Nutanix has done incredibly well. They were one of the fastest growing enterprise companies as they were growing. I ended up at Google, helped launch something called Google Play, scaled that up, did Quetra, sold that to SimilarWeb. Again, very technologist at heart. We started Quetra because we knew that there was a lot of data on mobile phones that wasn't being used to personalize experiences, whether it was content personalization or ad personalization.
Sure.
We thought we can really change how that works. We got the technology right. We built it over about 18 months, and then I went to sell. So the opposite of what Dheeraj, Ajit, and Mohit did. They were selling and then building. I said, no, that's not how you do it. The technologist in me said,
Right.
let's build it, and once it's ready, go sell it. And I remember, because of the things I'd done prior to Quetra, I was able to get some incredible ad agency meetings where I went in with a beautiful pitch deck and I told them, I've got the best data in the world. You should spend your ad dollars on me.
Yep.
And the first thing I remember this woman in New York told me was, with all due respect, Ankit, I took the meeting because I know of your background and what you've done. But the last 3 meetings with others I had, they also said they've got great data. So I don't know if you're just like them or if you're better. I want to trust you,
Absolutely.
but
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a test budget of $5,000 and then $10,000. And then if it works well, then 50,000 and grow from there. I was like, I kind of don't like this game.
Yeah.
Right? The fact that I know I have great technology, but that doesn't speak.
Yeah.
It doesn't, because everyone can say they've got something even if they don't.
Sure.
And we decided to then pivot the business model to be a competitive intelligence platform because of the data we had, and we got acquired by SimilarWeb. So that was kind of the Quetra journey,
Right.
where I realized that I will never start a company again without knowing what the customer is paying for, and knowing that we will build after we know what to sell.
And in this instance, it was your idea. You were the engineer who wrote the code, and then you were the one who was instrumental in getting this company acquired and who paved the exit strategy of the company, right?
I had a team, but we built this
How
together.
large was the team?
We were
Yeah.
about 10 people, so
10
it
people.
wasn't
Okay.
a giant team, but it was
Yeah.
about 10 people.
10 people in 2 years' time
Yeah.
was wonderful. I
Yeah.
mean, for a first-time founder.
Yeah.
So from there on, then you went to
So the thing I'm most proud of with Quetra, one, learned some hard lessons, but two, 9 out of the 10 people, because of the exit we had, bought houses in the Bay Area. So as we went through that,
Right.
again, I think it's important for founders and from a cultural perspective to not just be thinking about themselves, their investors. Again, you have a fiduciary duty to do that for them,
Absolutely, yes.
but you also have a fiduciary duty to your employees and the journey, the risk that they're taking to take it along. And that's something that, I'm very proud of, that we were able to get an exit that was good for investors, about a 5x,
Sure.
good for us, and then good for the team members as well.
And you saw in the process wealth being created for people who were involved in that journey. That was phenomenal. So from there on, when the company got acquired, did you take a formal position with the
I did.
company? Or okay.
So I was with SimilarWeb for about a year and a half when some friends at Google reached out and said, hey, we're thinking of starting a venture fund
Sure.
focused on AI. I said, why not just Google Ventures?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, this AI wave is coming. We're about to publish the Attention is All You Need paper. And we think there's going to be a whole set of companies that are both horizontal and vertical, and it's an opportunity to establish leadership from an AI venture fund perspective. And
Right.
the thought in my back of my mind was, why not just part of Google Ventures? But I said, well, I'm going to take this opportunity because it's not every day you get to start a venture fund backed by Google, and see the other side of the table, if you will.
So this is very interesting. How did you pivot from being a founder and a technologist at heart, right, building something, to now being a venture capitalist? I mean, it's a different ballgame. You're still evaluating, firms that are coming in and seeing whether it's prudent to invest in them or not. But it's a different mindset and a different ballgame. How easy or difficult was that transition?
It's like any transition. You have to surround yourselves with others that have been there, done that.
Sure.
And I think one of the special things about Silicon Valley is that there's no shortage of advisors. When you go from being an engineer to being a founder, how do you do it?
Right.
You take the plunge, and then you build a network of other founders, other CEOs who you can lean on and say, how would you work through this situation, or how do you think through it? I think it's very similar as you go from an operator to an investor. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of people that have made investments, angel investments or venture investments, and so you just have to find those mentors that will guide you through it. And I was fortunate enough, because I had been a founder, to have a few investors in my network to lean on.
And how many years did you do that? Because I know in 2019 you eventually found Infinitus.
So I was at Gradient for 2 years. So we got it up and running. We did about 35 investments in those first 2 years.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That is wonderful. And I read somewhere that all you need is probably 5% of your firms to be 100x, right, in terms of returns, and then about 10% to be returning about 20x, and there you are, a 10x fund, right? So tell me a little bit about some of your best investments and what learnings did you actually use from those 2 years into what you're doing at Infinitus in terms of raising funds and and bringing in venture capitalists?
There's quite a few.
Uh-huh.
For my days at Gradient, one of my first investments was in a company called Algorithmia,
Sure.
which was acquired by Datadog. That did give real return on investment. Lambda Labs is one of the leading cloud infrastructure companies in the AI era. I led the Series A in that one and was on their board for a bit. BenchSci is a company out of Toronto that helps the largest pharmaceutical manufacturers with their bench scientists.
Right.
And we led their Series A. I think they've recently announced a Series D or E. There's a company called Airspace Intelligence, which uses AI to help airlines figure out the routes that planes take across the country in real time. And they've gone on to raise a few more rounds of financing and power, I think, most of the big airlines in the country today.
Sure.
And in the healthcare space, a company called Rad AI, which automates parts of the roles of radiologists. So there's a whole bunch of these companies that have grown extremely well. I think that first fund that we deployed is sitting on something like a 5 or 6x return
That's wonderful.
from the first 2 years of deployment.
Okay. So how did this idea dawn on you that, okay, now is the time for you to take a plunge and start Infinitus? Talk to me a little bit about how did you go about identifying the problem, and did you do a very elaborate, market study, and how did you qualify that there was this huge opportunity that you could potentially tap into and solve for?
So it's a funny story. In 2018, so I was at Google helping run Gradient Ventures. At Google I/O, Sundar demoed something called Duplex, where you could say, "Hey Google, make me a reservation at spa, restaurant, salon, etc." The demo was to a salon to get a haircutting appointment, if I remember right.
Sure.
And it was one of those magical demos that I know I will never forget. But many others didn't either because it kind of went viral. I went home that night and I turned to my wife and I said, "Shelby, you have to see this demo." And she was busy with a couple of things. We had at that point a 1.5-year-old. So I finally got her to listen to it. And I was like, you have to look at how this machine is talking to a human. You can't even tell that it's a machine. So there's speech recognition, NLP, speech synthesis. And I'm just, geeking out over it.
And this was in 2018
This was in
sometime?
2018.
Wow.
Uh,
Okay.
And she looked at me really funny and almost wanted to smirk at me. And I was like,
Uh-huh.
what's wrong? She's like, I don't know what most of those words mean, but this sounds like incredible technology. Why the hell are you guys making spa reservations with it? I was like, that's not
And
the
that's a
point.
very valid, pertinent question to ask back in 2018, right?
She's like, you have a machine that can talk, sound like a human, talk like a human, and you make spa reservations with it? That's the best you could think of? I'm like, oh, it's not me. I got
I would ask the same question, yeah.
right? And I said, what would you do?
Right.
And she spent her career in healthcare, across home health and hospice clinics at Stanford in the oncology department, and last 6.5, 7 years at a large pharmaceutical manufacturer, helping patients get access to expensive therapies for rare conditions.
Sure.
And she said at every single one of these groups, and really across healthcare, there are hundreds of, if not thousands of people at every institution that make and receive phone calls.
Yep.
Because the way data exchanges hands is over phone calls, not over API calls. And I said, why not? Like, why can't a doctor's office be connected to the insurance company and figure out what's covered and what's not covered? She's like, because there's tens of thousands of doctor's offices, tens of thousands of insurance companies. No. There's only like 10 insurance companies. No. There's 4 national payers. There's 32 blues. And then there's a very long tail
Right.
of thousands of insurance companies, and everyone has their own systems, and getting interoperability is not something real. So I said, okay, interesting. I believed my wife, but I was like, I'm a VC. So why don't I start diligencing this idea?
Right.
And I called my childhood friend, Sham Rajagopalan, who's my co-founder at Infinitus. We had done last startup together. We went to middle school, high school together, college roommates. So very deep relationship. I'm like, hey, Shelby's telling me that there's this possibility in healthcare to automate phone calls. And he's like, have you validated it? I'm like, can you build it? He's like, I can build anything.
Right.
He literally was like, he didn't say those words because he's too humble a guy, but he was like, we can build it, but let's validate it so we don't recreate the Quettro problem where we build something and don't know how to.
So was Sham in the Quettro journey as well?
He was,
alongside you? Oh,
yeah.
That's wonderful. Okay.
Yeah. So I said, all right, let's create a make-believe company and start doing diligence on it. So as a VC, I cold emailed a bunch of people from large healthcare institutions and said, I'm a VC at Google,
Sure.
and I'm doing diligence on a company that claims it can automate phone calls. Do you do phone calls?
Right.
And I got 100% response rate from the people I reached out to for 3 reasons. One, no one ever reached out to these people from Google. Two, they were intrigued that there was a startup that could automate phone calls. And three, they were
Pretty
like,
compelling,
and,
yeah.
and the three people I talked to in the 2 weeks following that, one of them said we have 200 people. One of them said that we have 4,000 people. And the third said, I'm no longer at a company, but they had a few hundred people. And they described to me the kinds of phone calls that they did. And they said, what company is it? I said, I'll get back to you in a few months.
Yeah.
Two of those three people ended up becoming customers of ours within the first few months of starting the company.
So therein you have the problem market fit, right?
Correct.
That there was a problem that people truly cared for.
Correct.
Now was the second part, which was to build a product.
Correct.
That is
So going back to the story with the Nutanix team, these were people that said, I will pay you millions of dollars
uh-huh.
if you build it.
Wow, that is, and there is a very strong message there that a lot of times in these conversations that we have right at home, right, talking to friends generally about things, and somebody says something which has so much of value and merit, right, that if you explore deeper, I think something very meaningful and impactful can come out of. So that is wonderful, and that's how Infinitus came into being. Okay. Good stuff. So what about, so you had identified that there was a problem that people truly cared for. Then came obviously the second part, which was to build the product with Shyam. Talk to me a little bit about that journey. What did the first product version look like and how different it is to what you have today?
No, we've taken a lot of inspiration from companies that have come before us. I talk about the Nutanix story from a go-to-market perspective. On the technology perspective, if you go back to 2018, 2019,
Right.
LLMs were there. They weren't popular. Everyone did not know about GPT 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right.
We didn't know about Gemini or Claude because those didn't quite come out yet. But there were Burton, there were other models, T5, that were out there that were able to do the early versions of what we're all used to today.
Sure.
And that was the promise on top of which we started Infinitus. We said this technology is going to get better. And as we get deployments, as we start having impact, that tailwind is really going to help us expand what we can do. And so we said, what are companies that have been built over long periods of time that took an early bet on a technology wave and then saw the results of that? And one that kept coming up was Waymo, and how in the late 2000s, they said, we want to build self-driving cars. The technology wasn't quite there yet. We hadn't made the breakthroughs on all the image processing, image recognition yet. GPUs weren't as powerful as they are today.
True.
But they said, we're going to ride this wave, and we see a future where cars will drive themselves. And the way they got around it, the early versions of those cars had all kinds of sensors duct taped on them, 5 different cell phones with different carriers to give redundancy on cell service, regardless of where you went. And so we said, what is the equivalent of that in the world of conversational AI or voice AI agents? Right. And so we've built a lot of technology that had guardrails against the things that those LLMs and those NLP models weren't good at doing back then, which it's been fascinating to see where the technology has gotten better. We're able to move a lot
so much
faster,
more. Yeah.
but the guardrails that we built then are still serving us incredibly well, because while the models have gotten better, they still hallucinate. And so, but the hallucinations are a lot more nuanced. And so you almost can't even tell when it's hallucinating.
Sure.
But if you have strong guardrails, then you're able to very clearly make sure you don't go off the rails.
Yeah. So it's very interesting you say that, because the first time I heard about AI agents and co-pilots, now everybody's talking about it, and LLMs, was probably in the last 12 to 15 months. I'm just curious to know, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, what name did you have for the AI agents that were actually making these calls?
Yeah.
Was it more so RPA in the background, and then there was a voice agent at the front end? I'm just curious to know, what name did you have?
Yeah.
Because there were different nomenclatures being used
6
at
years
that point in
ago.
time. Yeah.
So when we first went to incorporate the company, we incorporated it as Infinitus Systems
Sure.
Inc. But one of the other domains that we bought was Voice RPA.
Voice RPA.
.com.
There you go. Okay.
And the reason was, at that point, RPA, robotic process automation, was the hype. You had the UiPaths, the automation anywheres. In healthcare, there was a company called Olive, which kind of grew and then imploded. But everybody knew that RPA was a real thing, and digital transformation teams all around the world were adopting RPA. And so it was an easy story to say, you know how you've got processes that can be automated on the computer using RPA? Well, your workflows have a lot of processes off the computers,
Right.
including phone calls, and we are the voice RPA company. We didn't want to call the company that because we weren't sure if we were going to do more than just voice and if RPA would continue to be a thing. So Infinitus has actually served us very well. And the story behind Infinitus was that it's the Greek word for infinite, and we wanted to be the infinite turn machine in NLP parlance. Being able to go back and forth is called the turn. So we wanted to be able to have an infinite conversation, and that's where we built that from.
So it's very interesting, and I thought as much, and pat on my back that I
Yeah.
actually got it right in terms of RPA, and
Yeah.
because back in the day there was a lot of talk about conversational AI, but clearly, like you said, the technology's come of age,
Yeah.
and there's so much more you can do. Just I want to double click on this for a minute. Are you actually able to do a lot more? Are your AI agents a lot more effective than what they used to be 2 years ago? Or is it the same and now we just have a different name and a cooler name, which people just seem to understand a little better?
I think it's a bit of both. We're able to move faster. The time it took to implement a new voice agent was probably on the order of weeks.
Sure.
And now you can build good ones with the right platform underneath it in the order of hours and sometimes days.
So deployment is faster.
So deployment is faster.
Mhm.
The ability to iterate and be nimble is something real. But you need all the surrounding infrastructure, the guardrails, the safety detections, and all these other pieces. That's what we've invested in over the last few years. The other thing that has really come of age, it's not just the AI from an NLP perspective, but it's the improvements in speech to text, the
Sure.
improvements in realistic speech synthesis, which give you in different contexts the feeling of something that is truly conversational.
Got it. And just one last question on this. So is it still very rule-based, very deterministic, where when AI agents are calling, they know that if they go down this path, if then else this, or is it more intelligent where it actually understands the semantics, the tone, and all of that, and is able to then decide what to say?
Very much the latter.
Okay.
The kinds of use cases and the complexity of phone calls that we're handling, it just wouldn't be possible with rule-based agents. The average phone call that we do is 35 minutes long.
Wow. Where the AI agent is actually talking to the payer at the other end.
Yeah.
Terrific. Okay, wonderful. So I think at this point in time, I want to shift gears,
Yeah.
Ankit, and talk about how did the founding team get together? The one thing I think you had working for you was that you had already done something with Sham in the past. But talk to me a little bit about who were the other people who came together, and what are the things that you look at in your founding team in terms of skills and culture fit and competence? Uh, how did you determine that these were the right people, that you wanted on the founding team?
First, it was Sham and I, and then we started talking to friends in our network
Sure.
that had either been founders, been early at companies that had done well, um, and were interested in healthcare. I think those were the things that we were looking at, and interested in conversational AI.
And does Sham have a healthcare background? Or?
No, neither one of us does.
Okay. Yeah.
But both of us are passionate about improving healthcare.
Sure.
And I would say to this day, 90% of our engineering and product team had never worked in healthcare before Infinitus, but they were passionate about having that impact. On the go-to-market side, on the operations side that we have, there's a lot higher percentage of folks that have worked in healthcare in the past. And so
Sure.
we built the team in that way to get the best technologists and the best healthcare go-to-market and operations folks together in order to create these magical experiences. But we looked for people that had that 0 to 1 DNA. We looked for people that had been founders. And it was interesting. I think of the first 10 hires that we made, I think there was a moment in time when Sham and I said, 7 of those 10 were not working just before coming to Infinitus. So it was a very interesting statistic where
That is something you realize later. It's not that you went after those people.
correct. And whether it's people between roles, whether it's people that had done an entrepreneurial journey or taking a break but were ready to come back in, or someone that had a child, hadn't gone back to work, and now ready to come back into the workforce. But it was all people that were extremely passionate about technology, extremely passionate about healthcare, and really wanted to just pour their hearts and souls into the company.
So that was the mission from the very outset, that you actually wanted to look at this problem of long wait times in the entire process. It could be prior authorization, benefit verification, something I've experienced, right, as an end customer. You had a bunch of people who were very passionate about solving for this, and that was the mission, right? What were some of these other, software attributes that brought you together, where you thought that there was good, good understanding and coherence in terms of what you were looking to do?
So I did not know what a prior authorization or benefit verification was before we started the company.
Sure.
And I think to this date, 95% of people that I spend time with on the recruiting side have no idea what that is.
Yeah.
Because it's all happens in the back office. Now, today, not only do we do the benefit verifications and the prior authorizations, we also do patient-facing phone calls. So we're calling patients at pretty large scale to help their insurance companies cover them correctly, or for their doctors and their health systems to make sure that they are properly prepped for a procedure, or that they're being checked in on after being seen by their physician. So there's all kinds of use cases, some that are very relatable and some that are, I did not realize this is how the healthcare system works. The thing that, some of the software things that we looked for, again, you have to remember this was pre-COVID.
Right.
We were in the office 5 days a week. We were looking for people that did not want to, at that point, really see boundary between work and life. They were so passionate about the technology or the problem that they couldn't stop talking about it. And that was just a common factor in all of us.
And you may want to correct me if I'm wrong, but COVID in your case, for your industry and your business, was not a disruptor.
It was an accelerator.
It was an accelerator. I thought as much. Okay. All right. Just to put things in
Because
context.
most healthcare entities were not made to be distributed or work from home. So when they were forced to go home, people were like, oh, I need to order a bunch of machines and send them to people's houses who may not have good internet connections. It's not like here in Silicon Valley,
Right.
where everyone has a sit-stand desk and the perfect mics next to them and webcams. These are people who might not have much private space in their houses. And
Absolutely.
in healthcare, you have to work in private spaces if you're at home for patient privacy reasons. And there were all kinds of struggles that healthcare entities went through. And, thank God that they pushed through all that and helped all of us in society through it. But that was a time when they said, how can technology help us?
Yeah.
How can we augment our teams so that we can continue delivering top-notch care and being there for our patients during probably one of the scariest times for our whole
Absolutely.
country
Yeah.
and the world?
So, in my discussions with founders, one thing I've seen is, and something I can
Yeah.
see in you, you're very passionate about what you're looking to solve and what you're looking to build, right? So you have your mission very clear and you have a vision in terms of how you're going to get there. But in the same breath, and don't take it otherwise, what I've also seen is founders can be they can have a very tunnel vision, right? So focused about, what the end goal is, that, at times, things like building a culture in the company, which I think is one of the most important foundational blocks, you lose sight of that. Or that is not very important, right, for founders, especially early stage. Talk to me a little bit about what your culture code for Infinitus is, and, what are those guidelines that you have in terms of principles and your own ethos that you look at very, very closely?
So this changes over the different stages of a company.
Sure.
I think it's relatively easy in the early days, even if you don't spell out your culture, to have a good culture, because you hire people, you join forces with team members that seem to be similar to you, and you enjoy doing the same things. And there are certain breaking points as you scale the company, where if you don't make certain things explicit, others make decisions of where the culture will go. And sometimes that goes with your ethos and sometimes it doesn't.
And would you agree that the culture in a startup is the founder, and that's
It-
where it stems from?
In some ways, I think it's actually beyond just the founder. It's the early team,
Early
because
founding team.
it's the founding team and the people who, and as the team grows, people who take the agency to define it. So if you don't make something explicit, somebody else will.
Sure.
And so the culture comes from the people who get the ability to make it explicit. So what you end up seeing is, in many cases, founders or leadership teams working harder and harder to make things explicit so that it's clear to everybody else.
Absolutely.
And so, there's many companies, when they think about culture, they think about team building events, and it's good. It's a good way to bring people together.
And Instagram stories, which look really,
look
nice.
really great, right? During COVID, there was a lot of things that we started that we still do. Every time we have an all hands, the last 5 minutes is on doing something physical, whether you're dancing, stretching, meditating. And so this was all over video, and now it's sometimes in person. And when we get together for our full company offsites, we always do something physical together. And it's what that did for us, and we pushed each other to keep our videos on, because not all of us are good dancers. Not all of us can close our eyes and meditate for 10 minutes.
Absolutely.
Right? Some of us want to peek and see if others are doing it or not. But it allowed us to bring some vulnerability into this almost crazy time. And we're taking that on, as time goes on. I remember there was another one where someone on the team said, "Hey, I found this company that can ship a box of vegetables to everybody." And I was like, "Sure, why not?" And this was in the middle of COVID. And I remember getting this giant box full of more garlic and onions and every other weird vegetable I've probably never used. And then we all got on video and we cooked together.
Right.
But I think that's one aspect of culture and team building. When anybody joins Infinitus, we have, the first week of onboarding, my talk to them is about the culture at Infinitus. And we talk about our corporate values, being customer obsessed, being optimistic realists. So you want to be optimistic about technology making a difference to healthcare, but you want to be realistic about what's possible today versus what will be possible in the future.
Sure.
We stole one from Amazon called Disagree and Commit, but taking it a step further, disagree and commit. So you debate, but you commit on a path forward, and then you have to evangelize it. So you have to make it your own. As a company, we want to engage our employees. And then finally, one from the Marine Corps called See, Say, Do. It's easy to see something and just let it be.
Right.
But whether it's positive or negative, it's actually important to say something about it and to do something about it for positive reinforcement or correction. Those are kind of our values as a company. And then I describe our culture as a focus on winning together. And each of those words means something. So the focus part is the one thing I know our team is aligned on is using technology to improve healthcare. There's many other things in the world that are problems that we can improve, but that's not what we're there to do.
And the one thing that I do want to underscore, because you're making a very important point, is that culture actually is an offshoot of your mission, right? And your mission in this instance is solving the healthcare problem. Okay, wonderful. Carry on.
Yeah. So that focus part is when we are together, we're going to focus on improving healthcare. We're not going to try to solve the wars in the world. We're not going to try to talk or solve politics. Those are places where many of us might disagree with each other.
True.
And it's okay to disagree, but let's not do that at the workplace. Let's focus on healthcare at the workplace, because then we're aligned. If we're aligned and unified, then we're more likely to accomplish our mission. If we start disagreeing on things that don't matter and then not being able to see eye to eye with the person next to us, then we're less likely to accomplish our mission.
100%.
So that's the focus part. The winning part is also very important. I think sometimes the focus becomes on trying instead of winning. And I think that's not the right way for a startup to think.
So how do you define winning?
It's about how many patients we can impact. It's about how much time we can unlock. It's about how much of the workforce shortage problem that exists in healthcare that we can actually plug using technology.
Sure.
So we want to measure that winning together. Winning can also be closing the right candidate. Winning can also be winning in a competitive situation for a specific customer where there was an RFP. There's many aspects of winning.
And I'm glad you say that, because I've seen in organizations where winning is just a function of numbers on the board and revenue. What happens when the growth plateaus and slows down? Does that mean you're not winning? Does that mean at an organization level, everybody's losing? So I'm glad that you're saying and you're defining winning in terms of these micro goals and micro objectives, right? The day-to-day stuff.
It's very important. It's also, I always say a good company hires well, builds well, and sells well.
Right.
And if you're plateauing, you have to either hire your way out of it,
Absolutely.
build your way out of it, or sell your way out of it, right? And so you have to have those input metrics that are different than just the one revenue trailing indicator, which I think a lot of people focus on. And so that winning part is important, not only to track, but to figure out how you win. Because turns out people that understand what winning feels like are able to reproduce winning more often. And so
Absolutely.
you want to promote people that are making decisions right often. Again, another leadership principle from Amazon, which is be right often, not be right always.
All the time, yeah.
Because if you try to be right always, you'll become too conservative and you won't take risk.
True.
And startups only succeed if they take risk and get big rewards. So that the winning part is important, but also the context of not trying to make it so that there's no safe space to experiment is important. And the last one is if you're hiring well, at least at our stage of a company, we're about 160 people today. You're hiring a lot of ambitious, almost hard-nosed people in some ways. They're going to have a little bit of an ego.
Right.
So the together part is important. It's about humility. It's about realizing I'm great at a few things, but every other person we've brought together is great at a few things as well. And together, we're better than being by ourselves. None of us individually can change healthcare. None of us individually is going to be able to make the breakthroughs required on the conversational AI and voice AI side to solve these big problems. But together, we have a shot at it. And this goes back to the no titles thing in the beginning. It's not about making decisions because of someone's title. It's really disagreeing and committing on a path forward. It's really debating the right path forward by the merit of the debate rather than the merit of someone's title.
I would love for you to build on further on a very interesting and a very powerful comment and statement that you made, that how you win is super important. It's not just about the number of wins and what you're doing and accomplishments, but how you win. Qualify that a little bit when it comes to go to market and your interactions with your customers and partners and investors. How do you see that? How to win part?
You know, one of the things we hear time and time again when we're hiring people is, you guys just seem like good people. There was someone that I was interviewing yesterday, or actually we made an offer to yesterday, and this person has a few different options in front of them. And he said, you guys are a company where I'm going to be innocent by association. There's another company that he was talking to that's like, I'm going to be guilty by association. Sure. And that's an interesting way to, like, I've never heard someone describe it that way. But he said, you just have surrounded yourself with good people, which is good. We're hungry. We're going to go hard. We work hard, but we also want to be good to each other. Time on earth is limited, right? So that's important, but that extends even on the customer side, where we want our customers to not think about themselves as a customer of ours, but as us elevating what they want to deliver to their end beneficiary. In healthcare, the beneficiary are patients. We're all going to be patients at different points in our lives.
Absolutely.
And so the work that we do to unlock time is going to help our customers deliver better care to their patients, eventually us and our loved ones.
Yeah.
And so if they look at us as competitive, and this is a real problem in parts of the AI ecosystem, where certain companies are spreading the fear of AI taking jobs. And that's not the right way to think about it. We have to think about AI and technology as building blocks to elevate what we have in society. In our case, we want to elevate the healthcare workers that are burned out, that want to do more, but just don't have the bandwidth to do it. The ones that want to hire more, but just don't have the workforce to hire from. And so how can AI complement the system we have and elevate all of us? Because that's just going to serve us better.
Right. And it kind of reminds me of a very interesting point you made in one of our conversations around you being more missionary in your ways vis-a-vis mercenary. And I think the way you've explained that really drives home the point in terms of what the value system and what the ethos is. Now, it's interesting you talk about hiring. What I've seen, where I see a lot of founders and founding teams falter in terms of building their team initially, is there are four dimensions, right? So there is competence. You want to hire the right people for the right jobs. Then there is context. What is your business context? Like you said, agility, hustle, those are critical tenets of the culture. And then, like you said, there are these other cultural attributes. Some you've borrowed from other organizations that have got it right. But then there's this fourth very important dimension, which is cost, right? Talk to me a little bit about when this fourth dimension comes into play, cost. How do things change, and how do you make sure that your judgment in terms of getting someone on board doesn't get blurred.
Could you say a little bit more about when you say cost? Do you mean
The cost to hire someone, right? It could be in terms of the compensation that they expect, the equity that they're trying to negotiate, or just in terms of the source, right?
there's a couple of things that I've come to realize about my style as a leader and our culture as a company. Uh, we want to do right by our people,
Sure.
and the company is bigger than any one individual. Doesn't matter if it's me or anybody else. And I think Sham and I execute our actions from the perspective of knowing if everything was transparent, would people feel like the trust they put in us as founders, did we live up to that or did we falter them? And I think the cost of hiring, dollars and equity is one piece. And I think there's enough public benchmarks uh, to be able to compensate people fairly, uh, with some amount of variance. But I think the uh, bigger cost of a hire or a mishire is actually, do we continue to hire good people?
Right.
And when you make mistakes in hiring, which everybody does, we've made more than our fair share of mistakes. How do we correct it? And are we honest with ourselves and with the team about the fact that we screwed up? And I'll say, we weren't very good at that in the first few years.
And I'm just curious to know, how often do you sit on the interview panel? Like, how many interviews would you typically do in a week?
Um, no one has joined Infinitus without meeting me.
That is incredible. That's wonderful. So you still take the time out to.
100%.
Okay.
People are the most important asset that we have. Our team is what's going to make or break us. And so that, like, I very seriously take the role of making sure someone is not only competent, I actually trust the team to judge competency.
But it's more the culture that you were
It's
trying
the
to.
cultural part where Sham and I want to meet folks to make sure that we keep that bar where it is.
And would you agree when people say that hiring decisions are made in a blink? In the first 2 minutes, you know whether a person is a fit or a misfit, and after that, it's just a validation. I'm just curious to know what your thought process is. What are the red flags that you see, and where do you actually know in that first minute that the person is the right fit?
I think that's true 90% of the time. There's been a few cases where I've had questions about certain aspects of an interview or how the first couple of minutes felt when the team, when we debrief, uh, gave me counter examples to what I had been biased in the first few minutes or
Sure.
even in the entire interview, and I was proved wrong. So I think it's important to form your opinions, but then go into those debrief meetings knowing that there's more to a person than what you experience, and then give them that shot. And some of those folks have ended up being some of our most impactful team members and culturally strong team members. In other cases, we've made hiring mistakes.
Okay. And again, I think one takeaway from me is that how do you encourage people to really stand up and feel encouraged to speak their mind, even if they have a differing viewpoint, with their management. So I think that is super powerful. I think the one thing that I do want to spend some time talking about is how do you make sure that in addition to the co-founders, there are other culture carriers or culture custodians within the organization, and how can you keep increasing that number as you scale?
Yeah. So I think there's a few parts to this. One, I think it's essential that you do that.
Sure.
So Sham and I are not the only culture carriers. I think part of my role in the interview panel is also to answer certain kinds of questions that others feel it's better that I answer. And the candidates also get a feel of, hey, this is the person who at the end of the day, I'm putting my trust in.
Right.
Like, yes, they're getting some equity on paper, but it's the decisions of this person at this time that are going to justify whether that equity value goes up or down.
Very
There
true.
are a lot of decisions that are going to be made. And so if I have time to talk to investors, I need to talk to every employee because they're all investors in our company. They're investing their time and their resources into our company. Right. And so I look at that as part of investor relations in some ways.
Yeah.
I think our people operations team is a world-class people operations team because they carry our culture in a way that is, in my mind, very unique. I think I've seen it be very rigid in other organizations, say this is what people operations does. I think our people operations team, from the interview process to the onboarding process to just checking in on mental and physical well-being to just making sure our culture stays strong, plays a very big role in that. And they push back on every single leader and every single person when they feel like we're not carrying our culture well.
So you do this on an ongoing basis just to see how true you are to your culture in terms of your day to day, or is it more an year-end exercise where you do a dipstick to see
I think it's
what?
a continuous thing that our people operations team is always looking out for, because one of their mandates is to make sure that we culturally get better and better and better. Right.
Just very curious to know if there is a perspective, if there's a high performing developer, very creative, who's looking to join another company. Why should they join Infinitus? What is in it for them? If you can give a sense of that, that'll be wonderful.
Yeah, there's a few things. One, I think we're solving some of the hardest problems in NLP today.
Okay.
Right, they're not solved by anybody in the industry, and they're having real impact out in the wild. I think we recently shared that we've done over 5 million phone calls, over 100 million minutes of humans talking to machines. Um, that is orders of magnitude larger than any other healthcare AI company out there.
That's
Um,
possible, yeah.
and so being able to develop something, actually deploy it, and in a small enough team where you can own a large surface area and have that impact, I think that's just starting it, and going back to I think we just have good people.
Mhm. And what are a few things that you would highlight in terms of your culture, in terms of the offering, what people can expect in Infinitus? One thing you spoke about the meat of the role, right? You get to work on these advanced technologies and make a higher impact. In addition to that, what are some of these other things that people should take into account?
I think the diversity of experience of our team is pretty remarkable. We've gotten people that have worked in all different industries, seen how different pieces of infrastructure have built and matured over time. Different algorithms we often talk about how algorithms change over time to bring us to where we are, to try and see where things need to go. And even when it comes to the core IP, it's not like it's one or two people that are coming up with it. It's actually pretty distributed amongst the team where innovation is happening. So because of the number of founders that we have on the team, I think in the last 6 years, 9 people at this point have left Infinitus to start companies.
That is a huge testament to the the culture of innovation that you have at Infinitus. That is wonderful. So, Ankit, you raised your Series C round probably less than a year ago, and you said you are about 160 people. I want you to spend some time talking about how you think about scaling the company and the associated challenges in terms of still being able to attract top talent and make it attractive for the talent that you're recruiting. I've seen a lot of companies falter in their scaling journey when the focus shifts from people to other things. Talk to me a little bit about how you're thinking about it.
I think what you just said is the most important thing. Your focus can't shift away from people.
Sure.
And I think it's important to know, especially in the age of AI, whether it's people or not having people that is the problem, or something more fundamental. And so many companies implicitly or explicitly measure their success or their growth with the number of people. We rarely do that. We don't have explicit headcount growth goals. And I want to try and keep that for as long as possible. We need to be accomplishing our goals from a building well and selling well perspective, and then hire to fill the gaps that we have in our ability to execute. And so we really look at that as needed basis, which allows us to tell every single person that we're hiring what their mission is,
Uh-huh.
what outcomes we're going to measure them on a year out.
Sure.
And the last part of that is the competencies, which is what's typically in a job description. So if you have those mission outcomes and competencies, anybody looking at that understands the impact they will have. They understand why the mission in front of them is something that they can get excited by. So it helps us in having that clarity. It helps them knowing what the path for growth is as well.
It's very interesting you talk about this nonlinear scaling, right? Where your growth is obviously not a function of the number of people you bring on your team. Uh, Curious to know, you're using AI, the might of AI, right, in terms of automating some of these healthcare calls. But from your internal operations standpoint, what is the level of AI adoption? And you spoke about people operations as an example. So curious to know, how are you able to do more with less?
Yeah. So uh, there's quite a few things. I think any modern organization is using the likes of GitHub Copilot or Cursor to help with coding as a copilot.
Right.
We have similar copilots in many parts of our organization. On the go-to-market side, how to enrich our data using copilots, how to know who to target, how to personalize messaging. We sell to only large enterprises. I
Sure.
think we work with something like 44 or 45% of the Fortune 50 at this point. The way you go to market for those kind of organizations is very surgical account-based marketing. A lot of research goes into it, knowing the personas, knowing the leaders, what they've talked about. We use AI to bring a lot of that together.
That's wonderful. And I just also want to spend some time talking about what this journey has meant for you and for your family. This is your third venture, right? And I'm pretty certain it would have been a little turbulent at times, right? Talk to me a little bit about how you've coped with all the hustle and the fast-paced nature of what you do. I see you're taking a little longer to answer this question, so clearly there's a lot of
Yeah.
thought.
I don't think it's moments of turbulence. I think,
Right.
you're constantly changing the engine and moving planes as you go through this. And Sham and I talk a lot about the roles our families play in this journey. Both of us have little kids. I've got a 7-year-old and a 3.5-year-old. Um, my parents, my in-laws helped my wife and I kind of survive through all of this. Um, I try to be present when I'm physically present. It's not always easy. I think anybody who knows me knows that I've got three arms, my two, and then my phone, that are constantly there. Um, but I think that having that surrounding village of family is extremely important. And I think while Shelby gave me the idea to start Infinitus, I'm sure there's moments when she is euphoric that we're able to have this impact, but there's moments where she goes, "Man, I wish I never came up or asked that question," right? And because it isn't always easy. It is, I travel a decent amount. We work long hours, but we're excited about it, and the joy that it brings us is what keeps us going. And something she said to me a few weeks ago, and I was like, "Man, I don't think I can do everything because I need more time." And she's like, "Ankit, I really hope you're giving this your 100% because we're all sacrificing a lot.
There's so much, yeah.
So don't give 90% and then have regrets, because just give it a little more and let's have that impact together."
It's very interesting you say that. So how do you manage these conflicting priorities? Like, who shows up for that recital, that sports day? When the kids want dad, right, to be cheering for them. Like, talk to me a little bit about that. It must be a terrible strife, right, where you probably are in some other part of the world talking to clients and customers.
I think the good thing about COVID is that it taught us how to prioritize different things. There's no replacement for an in-person handshake.
Sure.
There's no replacement to going out to dinner and really understanding what's driving somebody. So that travel is a part of our reality, but it's also okay to have some of your meetings virtually. And so being able to know what to prioritize and when to do that is actually a superpower. And so whether it's my support team at home or my support team at work, that allows me to know when I really have to make it happen, and what I should not miss. I think that plays a big role. There's the recitals, the soccer games. You don't want to miss those moments either.
Absolutely, not at all. Uh, And one final piece of advice to first-time, early-stage founders in terms of now that you look back in on your journey and reflect on what you could have done differently, what you could have done better as a professional to be more effective, and at the same time, probably spend more time with your family. What would that advice be?
No, I think this is something that I'm still working on. I think it's okay to be vulnerable. I think it's easy to assume that everybody around you wants you to be perfect. Right? They want to look at you for answers, and it's okay to sometimes have questions. It's okay to say I don't know. and to say, these are the things that I'm working on. I recently got a coach after many years of thinking about it and questioning whether it makes sense or not. But it's things like how to be vulnerable to your team when things might not be up and to the right in every aspect.
Sure.
Because you shouldn't be afraid of, well, if I show weakness, what will I lose my team? Will I lose a customer? Whatever it might be. But that vulnerability is what makes the journey human, and I think that's important.
So at this point in time, if I were to ask you, what is that one thing that Ankit loses his sleep over and frets about and thinks about all the time, right? What would that be? Of all the things that you have playing in your mind.
The thing that wakes me up at night is normally my 3.5-year-old. Right?
That's got to be right up there.
That,
Absolutely.
that
Yeah.
that's right up there. But really, when I sleep, I sleep, and I think it's important for me to be able to do that. The thing I think about the most is people. I think about, are we attracting the right people? Are we elevating the right people? And are we empowering people in the right way? Because I think everybody who comes on the Infinitus journey wants to do the right thing for healthcare, because we're not solving a problem for someone else. We're solving it for ourselves. And so if folks feel like they're not empowered, if folks feel like they're not able to have the impact, that's something that I should be worrying about.
Last two questions. Ankit, the founder, or Ankit, the CEO? There's a difference, right?
Um, in different moments, it's different, but I think most of the time they're one and the same.
Okay. And Infinitus, the most profitable firm, or Infinitus, the most respected firm?
Both. I think there's something to be said about having impact, about and I talk about this again when people come and join us, which is, we want to create time for healthcare. We want to solve workforce shortage. And if you do that, you will become very profitable. I think if you focus on profitability, you will often lose sight of your mission. If you have the right mission and you accomplish it, the profitability and the respect will follow.
Ankit, this was a real pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. Lovely chatting with you.
Thanks for having me.
If you're listening to us on Spotify, Amazon, or Apple, if you like the content and what we're talking about, please go and hit those 5 stars and leave us a review. That goes a long way. And if you're watching us on YouTube, then please like and subscribe. And that way, you can be absolutely assured that our content reaches you and we follow you along, our journey. And we hope to bring to you more founders, more ecosystem builders to talk about their scale-up pursuits.
Thank you for flying with the Scale Up Flight. We hope you'll join us again soon.